Welcome to this Fireside Chat brought to you by SealID. I am Philip Hallenborg, the founder and CEO of SealID. We're broadcasting today from Stockholm, Sweden. And these chats, the Fireside Chats, are dedicated to the latest developments, trends, and insights into identity, trust, and of course, information security. So you can find all the Fireside Chats on sealid.com and also find supporting vlogs, blogs, and other materials. Welcome. Today, we have a very special guest with us. It is Peter Wimne from Adobe. Peter is customer success and especially involved in Acrobat Sign. Peter, maybe you can walk us through a little bit about what you do at work and your role.
Sure. Thank you, Philip. Happy to be here and really
Happy
want
to
to
have you.
share some good suggestions and what I've been experienced actually with the different customers that I do help. My role is to be a customer success manager, which means I'm helping the customers we have who use Adobe Sign for e-signatures and trying to get the most out of it.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting journey for many of our customers, especially with the way the world has been before. And I think that's what comes from my heart. I really want to help people be as successful as possible with the tools they are given.
Yeah. And walk me through, what's the typical customer profile? Are they large customers, enterprise kind of size?
We see all over the spectrum.
Yeah.
So it's anything from smaller ones to medium to big, and or enterprise, as we would say. But I would say my focus the last couple of years has especially been on the medium and the enterprise section.
Yeah.
And that's where we, have been helping moving from paper to digital.
Yeah. And geography-wise, you're based out of Sweden, but do you work across multiple regions? Are your customers typically involved in cross-border business?
Yes. So many of the customers that the companies that I work with, they are founded or based in the Nordics, but they're all global customers. And I would say you're probably going to see that with most companies these days. They're growing, going global, and that's when the different challenges arise.
Excellent. So with no further ado, Peter, let's go in and talk a little bit about these customers of yours and some of their challenges.
Yeah. So sharing what have been the biggest challenges when after they started, went from paper to digital, and then starting to look at the next step, we definitely see it's going to be legal and regulatory challenges. And then also what we will see is it will be customer experience. How do we get the best experience from the people, the signers that you send out the documents to? And then, of course, security. That's a part. How do I secure that it's going to be the right person signing, and also that you fulfill any requirements on your side?
So to summarize what you're saying, the first one would be legal and compliance. So basically, anything with regards to risk, legal compliance.
Yeah.
That means requirements from the legislator. Maybe they're doing multiple geographies, so they would typically have maybe 2 or 3 or more countries where they have to have, let's say, some kind of legal compliance framework that they have to meet.
That's a very good example. Let's say you have a company who operates over a larger region, and you probably in one country it would be sufficient enough to have an e-signature, a normal signature that you send out from a digital one. Sorry, not digital, e-signature. And then you come into another region which has the requirements, the local law requires you to actually have a digital signature, which is qualified signature, the highest level in a sense. You need to be ready to actually handle that. And that's a challenge that we see with many organizations. They're not ready for it because they don't see it when they go from a very local to a bigger region to global. How do you cover that? That's a big question in many organizations.
So you mentioned that, the legal and compliance, then you mentioned the user experience. So can
Mm.
you just walk me through what are the challenges for these enterprise clients? Let's say they're multinational, they're doing sophisticated products. It could be B2B, but I guess B2C. What are the challenges when it comes to user experience?
Yeah, so if we look in the Nordics, we're used to using bank ID, as we
Yeah.
call it. That's just the way of people are used to it, so it's easy. But when you expand in a larger region, you will have people who have different types of EIDs or ways of signing, and you want the customer, when you serve a larger region, to have an easy experience. It needs to feel safe. It needs to be as logical steps or few steps to
Yeah.
actually be signing. And the other part, if we move back to the company who actually sends this out, they want to cover as many countries as possible.
Yeah.
And if you open up to do it, whatever way of signing signatures you have, you're going to have a challenge
Yeah.
because it's going to be hard to validate them
Yeah.
if you can validate them.
Mm.
And if you open it up, how do you do? So it's easier to actually find a good solution to try to have a simple experience, which everybody can relate to,
Yeah.
and then be able to sign in the different countries.
So to summarize your second challenge and then on the user, it's a lot about how can you get the user base of your client, your customer, to acquire some kind of legal identity if they don't have one. So you
Mm.
started by
Yeah.
mentioning the Swedish legal identity, which is an EID. There are
Mm.
two types of EIDs in the EU AIDAS framework. I mean, obviously
Mm.
that's the regulation,
Yeah.
but you have the EID, and then you have these other types which are
Mm.
qualified certificates. But you mentioned that getting this in the hands of the user has been a challenge, basically, for these companies. So when they have a lot of different, it becomes fragmented, and then it's very difficult to, let's
Mm.
say, roll out a service because
Mm.
the user experience is too many, multiple,
Mm.
fragmented, and the product breaks, if you will.
Yeah. And I would say, so this is interesting because you could either open up for anything, but then comes the question, how do I validate this? How do I do this? Then you can also switch and say, I will provide this because I want this to be safe. I want this to be an easy way of administrating, handling, or also have a good way of the experience for the customers. You know, whichever region you're going to be in, that they will have a good experience because there might be a good experience for some signing, you know, a way of signing in a certain country. But if
Mm.
you come to another country, if they need to sign with a qualified signature, they might have to actually go somewhere,
Yeah.
identify themselves. That's time, that's difficult. And how do you then actually validate that in the back end when they've signed?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good question on, should we open up for anything, which causes time? You need to validate again, be sure. You need to have contracts to be sure to connect and validate those signatures to many different providers. Or do you find a simple way to actually offer the experience and reduce the risk to
Yeah.
it? That, I think, is actually something that's a big challenge for many organizations. They have these discussions internally. How do we approach this? How do we grow?
Mm.
That's a
It's very interesting, Peter. And actually, this last point you made, it sits more with the third family of challenges, which was security, right? So,
yes.
identity proofing, standardizing what signatures you use.
Mhm.
And you were alluding to different levels of signatures. So, in the world of the AIDAS regulation, obviously there's the very simple, there's the advanced, and then you
Mm.
have the qualified. But
Yeah.
I guess it's first at the qualified level where you can, start talking about addressing some of these security challenges that you
Yes.
mentioned. So liability, one tool for validation, et cetera. So you're basically saying that these validation problems, getting one solution, getting something that can be rolled out, together with the legal compliance and the user experience, this comes as the other third
Yep.
big problem.
Exactly. And you kind of, the security part kind of combines the question on how do we know that this is actually the right person? How do we, to put it in other words, you really want to reduce risk to being, open for any kind of fraud or any other
Yeah.
parts that
Yeah.
could harm you.
Yeah.
And you really want to also make it a good experience, as we talked about before. But if you do find this way of implementing for qualified signatures in an easy way, and it's also much easier if you end up in a situation where somebody is challenging you and you need to go to a court.
Yeah.
The court is much more open, and they have to look at and see
Sure.
this is a qualified signature.
Yeah.
If you do any kind of other validations of it, it might be questioned more. So I think you want to reduce risk, and you want to check it also if there's a high risk or a high cost.
Mm.
You really want to implement, a qualified signature. And then back to the other parts, how do we do it? How do we have a great experience?
Yeah.
That's the challenge. So they kind of intervene with each other or twine together. So these three are really important questions. It's more like, how do we go to the next level and cover more in an easy way and secure?
So, Peter, we talked about these three challenges, and they were essentially for enterprise companies going global. We talked about everything from the legal compliance, the user experience, and then finally the security aspects, including validation. Now, if we look more specifically at this one of the two families, so we talked about EID, which is under the AI, just a national framework. It's a way to get an identity from, let's say, the nation state, Bundesdruckerei, whatever it is. And then we have the other family, which is qualified certificates, which are separately regulated, but let's say much more standardized, and they're more international. How would you say that these qualified certificates and signatures, and also in the framework of what Adobe is doing, how do they fit? And what do they do in your world?
That's a good question. So I think, as you mentioned there, the different levels and how they fit, it would fit. It's very much dependent on what kind of document and what you want to send out. I know there's no silver bullet. I mean, you really need to look at whatever process you're trying to actually, digitize to actually run through a workflow or do anything. But I would say, maybe repeating a little bit what I said about the other, explaining about the challenges, you need to look at what's the risk and what's the value. How much are you actually putting up at risk?
Yeah.
And then you, of course, coming back to, again, the, is there any regulatory requirements for this?
So just to summarize, Peter,
Yeah.
what you're saying is it's probably not enough for a modern enterprise organization to just work with one level of signatures.
No.
What they've worked with so far. Maybe that's an email address and then just click of a button. You're saying that two things are driving a need for something that's, let's say, a more sophisticated approach with higher signatures for certain use cases. And you mentioned two things that determine this. One is legal compliance, and the other one is risk appetite. Would that be
Yes.
correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at, if you want to make it super simple, you kind of just send out an e-signature, which is an email. You just pick it up when you receive it in your inbox, and you kind of put your signature there, and everything's fine. But let's say you're actually subscribing to something bigger, maybe a car. Well, the enterprise actually sending this out, even if it's just a subscription, it's still a high risk for the company sending out or providing you with a car. So they really need to be sure that you actually are who you say you are. So thereby, I would say that the qualified signature is much better in case you need to go to court or drive this further, and also if you're in a part where you said where there might be some risk to it. So yes, there is a need for this. And what you also want to think about, let's say you end up in a situation where you have to address this situation, you need to bring it to court. Well, you really want to make sure that it's going to be as painless as possible. You want to show that, yes, this was the person. Yes, we did validate it in a good way that is accepted by the courts that we have generally in Europe.
Sure.
So I think, yes, that it is. It's about saving time and be sure as well. You want to build a good process where the people in the companies feel safe to proceed with the process
Yeah.
to feel like, yes, we got the right person, we want to offer this for you, and they sign, and everything is fine.
So let's stay a little bit on that use case, right? So you
Mm.
were describing, let's say, an international car manufacturer,
Mm.
and they are, as we know, going towards, I guess, direct retail.
Mm.
So there's a lot of change happening in that industry, and they would be marketing and selling cars online,
Mm.
and that moves maybe focus from, let's say, the dealership, which used to be all of that you
Mm.
just described before, but now it's a one-to-one relationship with a consumer
Mm.
that's buying a car online. And maybe even to the extent where they want to deliver the keys, they want to deliver the car outside the door, and on top of that, credit.
Mm.
And I guess that you're saying that that would involve both risk for the actual car,
Mm.
the monetary value of the car, and if you're parking it outside the subscribers or the consumer's car house, but it would also involve maybe some legal questions. So identification, KYC, when you're identifying a new client for financial credit, for example. Yeah. So this is what you're describing. Yeah.
It's a very good, yes. So it's, let's see, enterprises or companies who are moving from a business to business to a
Yeah.
business to consumer. It's a big difference.
Yeah.
And you want to be sure, because you're suddenly handling not against another business. So it needs to be very clear and very, because the cost of driving any issues that you would have, or driving a lawsuit or anything like that's going to be expensive.
Massive, yeah.
Yes, so you really don't want that to happen. So, but again, so you can flip all of these risks to a positive thing and say we can deliver to a customer.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't have to be business to business. It can be business
Sure.
to consumers
Yeah.
as well, because we use the right level of security by getting the right signature. So I think many companies that I work with have been worried, but when we talk about the potential, instead of saying we can do this easier, by just doing the right level at the right time.
Yeah, and when you say the right level, this is really establishing a legal identity,
Yeah.
so that you don't have to think about every single question for every single country, because at the end you have so many different questions and risks that you can't make the decision. And then we know that everything's evolving anyway, everything from information security, fraud vectors, and of course legislation locally.
It's yes, and I would say, just as a very simple example, you normally have somebody who works locally, and then you probably have somebody who is responsible for a region,
Yeah.
and then maybe, and the region maybe in this case I would call it the Nordics,
Yeah.
but then it might grow to Europe, or it might be global. Well, the people who are responsible for these levels, they want to have an easy way of securing and knowing that we can handle it, number one. Number two, that we're handling it in an easy way. And that way is actually qualified electronic signatures, because it gives you that easy way of just asking, do we have the right level? And if you're unsure for any reason, well, then you probably should go with that, because then you're sure. You have covered it in a good way.
And maybe you could argue also that if you can just make that user journey smooth enough
Yes.
and standardized enough, which I guess with mobile computing, a lot of things happening today, for the first time, we may not need, let's say, smart cards or dongles or whatever they are. We can actually do a lot of this with smartphones, right? So you can actually disclaimer that Seal ID is obviously a company working with these kind of technologies. But if we just talk about the qualified certificate, as opposed to the EID, it's not a national scheme only for citizens. This is something you can leverage globally. So you can have, you can sell a car to a native American, or sorry, a person residing in the U.S. You can sell it to anybody in Europe, etc. Right? So it becomes very flexible.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Peter, we just talked about at length this car retailer scheme, but what would you say, if you look at the industry now, where's the fastest growing demand? What use cases would you identify as here's a use case to watch in the industry?
So probably because what the world has been for the last couple of years, we did see a tremendous growth within HR.
Yeah.
And it also makes sense because that's the first part where you need to cover, especially if you're also growing as an enterprise.
Yeah.
Because you probably want to actually have the possibility to hire people from many different parts of the world. It's going to also be virtual teams,
Yeah.
which means it's not longer just local. So you actually build together teams from all over the world, which means that the HR department now needs to handle hiring people from all over.
Yeah.
And thereby, we do see these use cases popping up saying, how can you support with e-signatures to make our life easier? That's the simple question.
So let me just rephrase that. You're saying that, so I guess a little bit of COVID, we've got the new gig economy where we've got people that don't even meet in the office, the Uber models, whatever. And on top of that, we have global multinationals that are providing, let's say, workforce management in multiple regions and countries with different legislative situations, right? And there you're basically saying that that is a very, very good and fast-growing place to use legal identity, like qualified certificates and signatures.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Absolutely. And it's more than just hiring. I mean, HR does a lot of different things.
Yeah.
They handle, of course, hiring, then maybe changes
Yeah.
within your role
Yeah.
or promotions
Yeah.
or you're moving into something completely different. There are also other things like parental leaves and things that need
Benefits, costs,
exactly.
long-term incentive.
And they need to be covered in a good way that it cannot be challenged, or it needs to be very clear, because every time it becomes a friction that you feel like, no, I didn't approve that and say that, you want to minimize the time and you want it to be very clear between, between the employee and HR, because it actually costs time, and it's also a negative effect for the employee as well.
Yeah.
They really want to make sure that, yes, this is what I'm signing. So you need to think about, we're talking about a different way of signing, but this also comes back to another thing. It's important to prepare for HR the documents, then they're provided in an easy way with the right information, and then you read it and then sign it. So that, I think, is one of the hottest use cases, HR, or the area within HR, to support HR to make an easier way of handling a wider, bigger region, or bigger, a global, and also different types of documents. And as we I think we talked about before, is there are different requirements in different regions.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's okay with an e-signature, but in others, you have to have the qualified signature.
So basically, least common denominator.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's super important.
So are you seeing that multinationals, because what you're describing sounds like the whole, basically, life cycle of an employee
Yes.
with, I don't know, you mentioned quite a few families of agreements, and we talked about a lot. So it's almost like the whole HR or life cycle around the employee is sweet spot now for legal identity and these qualified signatures. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And important also to mention is that most of the organizations do have a system or a tool to actually help them with this.
Yeah.
And that's fine to put in all the information, have all the templates and documents there. But then when it comes to having that easily made available to everyone, they just click, all right, let's distribute it. What you want then is to be integrated then to actually put a signature on it.
Yeah.
So you don't need to think about it. And it should be all the way through, it should be like, oh, I want to, I have the opportunity to maybe have a new company car, or I need some time off, but due to the legislation or whatever you have in your country, you need to sign it. It should be from that system to a document with the right type of signature.
Yeah.
And it should be supported in an easy way for the HR department.
Yeah, and I guess this goes back. So you're saying that, already today, modern organizations are using workforce management platforms.
Yes.
And I guess some even embed or in other ways include Adobe.
Yeah.
But the missing piece here would be if you add a qualified certificate or a signature, you get other parts of this. It could be the first registration of an employee that doesn't show up at the IT department or office. somebody driving a food truck or whatever it is. So you can manage these life cycle, big episodes by using the current systems, workforce management, that are modern and digital and everything, maybe including Adobe, but you need to add those qualified signatures so you really get, call it the authenticity and
Yes.
the valid kind of identity interaction there between the employer and the
That's
employee.
been a missing piece.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so many the how do you say, the easy document, the document that just needs like, okay, hey, just click OK
Confirm.
or just confirm this. But then you come to the next level and you want a signature, and then you need to then you think about everything that we talked about before, the complexity of legislations and wherever in the world you are.
Yeah.
Then that's a really good thing. So I think HR is definitely one of the hottest areas where we see, and the easiest way to actually do a lot of how do you say, big change. I mean, it really impacts, and it's in a good way.
Yeah.
Because we have the employee. Let's say you're offering somebody a position, and you can do that right away. So you pick up the document and you want to make sure that this person signs, because you don't want to lose that person. When you put that time in and it's the right person, you want them to sign.
Of course.
So you need to have that signature.
Yeah.
You need to have that paper. You need to have that tool, because you don't want them to drop off.
No.
And on the flip side, you as an employee, or actually a future employee, you're getting this offer, you really want to feel that I get the documents, we can go through it right away. I don't need to, read it in, later in the evening and have 10 different questions. I want to go through it. I want to sign it because you're probably happy with, the position you're looking for. So I think it serves well in the face of making it easier for HR. It will reduce the number of drop-offs. It will also make it easy and a good experience.
Yeah.
It's a good first experience of the company you're going to work for.
Yeah, that's a very important point, Peter.
Yeah.
Because I guess if you're stuck in some paper signing, wet ink, the CEO or director, hiring managers on vacation, you end up 6 weeks, and as you're saying, the risk of actually losing the candidate. Piled on top of the other risks, which is, will the employee agreement be recognized?
Yeah.
I mean, this is obviously sensitive if there's litigation. You have the other parts, which is in I guess 9 countries or so, more and more coming in the EU. The minimum signature accepted is a qualified, right? So you would have to find that least common denominator, and also create an experience for the employee that's, let's say, the best possible one if they're starting in your company.
Yeah.
But what do you think about if you look at something like risk for the employee? So personal data risk. Do you think there are benefits for companies that if they establish the real data of that employee? Do you think this is part of the HR cycle too, to safeguard that data? I mean, we talked a lot about information security needs.
Yeah. It absolutely is. And I mean, if you have the highest level of authentication, you know that it's going to be the right person, it's going to be the right information. But also when you run it through, in this case, let's Adobe Sign, when you have this e-signature platform that can handle it and secure it and put a seal on it, that's going to help you quite a bit.
Yeah.
And also, if you have it integrated to another system, there might be additional levels of security.
Sure.
or handling information in a good way.
Yeah.
So I think this really helps as well for the employee or the person that you sending this to, the recipients.
Yeah. So for the audience, just an explainer is that most of the, let's say, most modern systems of qualified signing, they include also authentication mechanisms,
Right.
because that's obviously what a signature is at the end of the day. But they include these in a very secure way, so you'll see both the authentication and the signatures keep that very high signature creation and qualified level. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we're not going deep into the identification and authentication right now on the user in itself, but you can add a lot of
Yeah.
layers on that
Yeah.
as well, since we're looking now more into how can you make these documents, signed and legal,
Yeah.
and meeting the requirements that we have, but the challenges as well, because these are, as we talked about before, the big challenges that the organizations see when they take the next step.
Yeah.
And I think it can be done easy enough if you just validate, what do we need, how do we do it, and in what for what documents do we need to do it, and don't take it all at once. Start with one kind of success and then just build on it, because you will gain a lot of experience on it, because there will be initially, of course, some discussions. When do we need it? How do we ensure? And as we mentioned before, the risk and the cost about it.
Yeah.
And your internal legal will probably look into this. And I think that can be a good helper or stepstone to the next use case or next department.
Sure.
You just say, from the experience we had, this is what we've done. And then you're within the company, they kind of set also the level of when do we need it? How much do we want to risk? They suddenly kind of quantified everything and said, this is when we need it. This is how much we will risk. So it becomes much easier to take the next use case, the next department, and implement this. And again, also the experience of how do we make this a good experience.
Yeah. Speaking of next use case that you just mentioned, so we were talking about subscriptions before, sales subscriptions. We now spent a lot of time on HR and learned about your view on the whole HR life cycle. What else would you mention as important, let's say, emerging use cases?
I would say that one challenge that I've seen, it's actually, if you look within the company, you're probably going to have a number of meetings.
Yeah.
This is maybe not the biggest use case, but it's actually a very important one. You might have board meetings, you have notes, you have documents that needs to be submitted to the local
Sure.
any
Company's house or
exactly. And those are the ones that actually been it's been a challenge to actually do that before. But now with these, the possibility to actually take the notes, send them out to signatures, and many companies, as we mentioned before, they're actually the people in a board are probably going to be from different parts of the world.
Sure.
Or they might have
multinational companies, subsidiaries.
Or even if they are locally in one city, they might have different nationalities.
Yeah.
So it's good to be able to cover that.
Yeah.
That's a big use case. And I would also say that even those meeting notes that I said, let's just, another example could be like, let's say you are a contractor, or actually you provide drawings or decisions on a big building.
Yeah.
And you really want somebody to sign off on this.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that this is the right person that has the authority to sign off, because it's quite a big value on that contract.
Risk, business risk.
And to simplify everything, at one meeting you decide that, hey, we want to have everything blue. And then you don't get those meeting notes signed. And the next time you meet, they say, no, we want it red.
Exactly.
Who's gonna actually be paying for that switch of the color?
Yeah.
You need to get that sign off on meeting notes. So that's actually as important as other contracts in itself, because that's actually a change probably to the contract or just a clarification to what you ordered.
Yeah.
So even if you sign a contract, meeting notes are not a bad thing to sign. Yeah. And then you might discuss, do we really need it to have it at the highest level? It depends. Depends on where you're going to build it, where you're going to deliver.
Sure. Commercial risk.
How big is it? So that's actually one thing that I see as a big use case.
Yeah. So to summarize this, you're talking about company administration, and certainly those documents that are, let's say, mandated by law. They could be related to company administration, directors of the board, meeting minutes. You mentioned. Then you mentioned another group, which is big commercial risk.
Yes.
And you had the example of a contractor that could be, okay, we need your approval, and there's a big payment due because of that approval. I know another example, which would be actually credit. We
Yes.
have quite a few customers that are doing credit for a bank. Obviously, the the value of the credit is the balance sheet asset for a bank. So if there's any problem with the integrity of the credit, then obviously there's a big problem with not only the integrity of the credit but the balance sheet. And that can have huge repercussions for a bank, right? So that would be another.
Right.
And then just to add to this administration, external, internal that you're mentioning, RFP. So we're
Yes.
seeing more and more public tenders, all of that. That whole family of business is requiring qualified signing. Yeah.
That's true. That's also an area where we've seen a lot of growth and need
Yeah.
for qualified electronic signatures. That's absolutely right.
So just then, final, do you think, so we've mentioned, quite a few use cases now, and these are the ones that we see strongest emerging now, but we're also implicitly saying that we think more use cases will follow. You've been mentioning this. Do you think this will become a horizontal product where you kind of use it across very many use cases, but with that, you kind of describe it as I mean, you have to make the assessment, but once you made the assessment, you will probably be leaning towards, okay, here I need something more secure. So do you think we will see these use cases grow, but none other, or do you think we will grow into more and more use cases?
I think we're going to see these type of use cases that we discussed is absolutely going to grow and maybe call it mature,
Yeah.
which is going to be from the experience that we had from it. Then I don't think there's nothing stopping from going into almost covering everything.
Yeah.
I think that's actually going to be the need within many of the companies. They're going to say, hey, this works fine. And we already have a platform on an easy way, and our customers or the people whom we send this to are used to it. So let's expand it. Let's just do this. Because even though we didn't have time to discuss and go deeper on some of these use cases, what you do is you look at how can we be efficient, clear, minimize risk, reduce cost, all of these things. But on top of that, what we're trying to do is make it life easier for not only the recipient that you send it to, but also for the people who are actually producing these documents or sending these out. So this will spread. This will absolutely go into the other departments. And when they see the possibilities to do this and in a clear, structured way and legally safe, they will feel safe to expand it.
Yeah.
So yes, I see this as growing probably more in the use cases we discussed or the areas of within a company, but then it will absolutely cover more and more within an organization as they mature and feel we have found a way to handle this. Handling digital signatures within Europe. Now their US departments are asking the same questions. How can we actually get these way of validating the people who are going to be signing in an easy and quick way?
Yeah.
And since it's already established in their organization within Europe, and we do have a high level of security and it's accepted pretty much, more or less, to summarize it quickly, they say, let's go with that.
Yeah.
Let's try this out because it's good, it's approved somewhere, and it's absolutely better than most what we can get in our region. And this is not only for the US, we see it in South America, we see it in other parts of the world where there isn't anything that's easy to do or easy to implement, I would say. They are actually looking into how can we implement qualified electronic signatures. So yes, that's a very good observation and something we definitely seen.
Yeah, I can't help thinking about the data protection regulation, GDPR, in Europe, that I know that Brazil, for example, they adopted something very similar because once one block has moved towards a standard, it's obviously much easier to, let's call it, embrace that standard and make it your own, even if you're not part of the EU block. So to summarize, you would think that this is a big movement happening. So I guess if the US move and the EU moves, then I would imagine that the future for personal certificates, legal identity, is around the corner.
Personally, I guess so too. Absolutely. I think, and it's the good thing with this is it's gonna make life easier for everyone, for companies, for consumers, for everyone to actually be able to have a contract and be able to sign it in a way that's going to be legally and binding in both ways.
Yeah.
It's not just one way, it's both ways. Both are responsible for their obligations when you know, sign a contract or a subscription or whatever. So I think that's, I really hope so. And I hope that they do find a way to actually speed this along. But we do see those indications. So I hope
Yeah.
so.
So, Peter, I'm going to ask one last question now.
All right.
And I'm thinking maybe somebody out there in the audience is maybe one of your clients. Maybe they sit with Acrobat Sign today and they're really, you know, considering, you know, this sounds like something we need. Maybe they've had legal compliance issues. Maybe they're cross-border. And at some level, you know, they have risk and they have new use cases and they're embracing digital. Is this kind of technology very difficult? Is it like a big integration? Is it, I mean, we haven't talked so much about the technology behind this, but if I'm a typical Acrobat Sign client, you know, is this very difficult? How does this happen?
Oh, a very good question. It's actually super simple to get going. And
you're not saying that because
No.
you're selling now.
No.
We're not allowed to sell.
No. Well, so I just want to share, to get going, it's very simple. If you use, let me take this example with Adobe Sign, you have everything also already included in the box, so to say, which means the possibility to connect and actually start using qualified or any type of digital signatures, and the connection to, in this example, Seal ID can be done. So it's just a matter of actually, you know, purchasing the type of qualified electronic signature that you want,
Yeah.
and also the Adobe Sign. That's it. It's super simple. It's a couple of clicks and a couple, you know, of course you need to have the product in itself. Otherwise, there's nothing to it. It's easy to get started. So then somebody might say, well, so what's the trick? Well, it's about talking internally,
Yeah.
checking out. So when do we need it? When are we required to? So technically, to provide you the tools to be able to do it, it's very easy and it's very easy to set up. But my recommendation would actually be to the audience to engage with your local IDs and check your, you know, rules and regulations, any kind of requirements that you do have.
So to summarize, Peter, you're saying that it is relatively simple for one of your clients to get started, but you're also describing that maybe the biggest journey is one that's internal.
Yes.
Between decision makers, and I guess that's always the case. Yeah.
It is. Start with that one use case that you already have in mind, get that going, and then take the next one.
Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. We at Seal ID love speaking to people who know the industry and sit close to customers. We'll come back in a year or two and see if you were right on your predictions. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip.
Peter, we've covered quite a lot today, but I'd really be interested to understand, what do you think the next 2-3 years look like for your enterprise clients?
That's a good question, and based it on, we touched on it a little bit already, but we definitely going to see, as we said, a maturity within the organizations, which I think is going to open up for more digital signatures. So it's going to be heading against the qualified electronic signature. I'm almost certain of it, because it will build you and give you what you need to cover more areas, be more safe, have the right, you know, coverage for any legislations or any requirements that you have. So that's going to be, and it will take a little bit of time,
Sure.
but it will grow. It will start in some areas and then grow. So
Grow
that's
from there.
one part, absolutely,
So volume growth of qualified
Yes.
signatures. Yeah.
Absolutely, because it becomes easier and it becomes a good experience. So that's a positive thing for everything. It just will grow on that part. The other part that I do see is it's going to be more automation. Of course, the popular AI. We're going to see more, growth on that and see how ways of using it, and it's going to be workflows as well. How to make these documents that we've been talking about, the signature, but the flow of the document, that's going to be so important. How do we make this flow as easy as possible for the senders, and automation to be able to, in a completely different system, just click in something, it will produce, create the document, it will validate it that it's not, in any way wrong, and it will then push it out and it will get the right type of signature for it. So that's what I see is coming. And we do see this already, but it's going to improve. It's absolutely going to improve. It's going to be a big change. And it might even be a big change in the creation of these templates, these documents, with AI, with workflows and automation.
And this, I guess, is something that Acrobat Sign is working a lot on.
Oh yeah, that's been something. I mean, you know, AI is, even though it's a very hot topic right now, I mean, Adobe has been working on it for a long time, and now we're seeing it moving into many different areas. So it's going to be an exciting next couple of years to see where it goes and how it can support also the users in a good way.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is going to happen the next couple of years.
Yeah.
And then one important thing, which is a combination of the other ones, it's the end user experience. It's going to be a lot of focus on making this a good experience. So it's going to be important to find the right flow with the minimum steps, but visually pleasing and easy to understand and easy to use and easy to understand for the recipients, for the people who are going to be signing. And as you mentioned, smartphones, I mean, it will be the tool that everyone uses. So your digital ID, hopefully there, easy to sign. You will get the document to your phone, to your computer, and easy to put your qualified electronic signatures when needed on it. So I see that a lot of work in the end user experience is going to be absolutely. And on a side note to that, it's going to be pretty much the same for the senders. There's going to be a lot of work on, if, let's say I go on vacation, somebody needs to help me. You want the experience for whoever covers for me to be a good experience, and this is easy to send out and have the right experience. So it's the the user experience on both ends.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
So to summarize, you're talking about the volume of qualified, and you're seeing, I guess, vertical, horizontal expansion of qualified signatures. And then you went and talked a lot about the flow, basically.
Yeah.
Of course, technology, the cloud is working for these enterprise clients of yours. So they will automate, they will use modern technology, but above all, they will have a flow that makes sense. So the different things that need to happen, everything from setting up a document to populating it to validating, signing, that will happen more automatically. And you mentioned important that regardless of who the user is using that flow internally in your enterprise, needs to have a good experience. And then you went off to talk about the user experience for the end user, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good summary. And let me ask this. So one of the things I've been a little bit surprised by in the last 1 to 2 years is, although the AI dust regulation is a European product, obviously pointing to ETSI standards, they've become the global standards, much like GSM telephony, they've become the global standards for signing. One of the things that I've seen is that the US companies are very fast in adopting this technology and moving into this because they can see the need arise with their clients and networks and whatnot in the EU. What's your view on what's happening with these US players, and do you think that the ETSI standards and qualified signing will be relevant not only for US companies in Europe, but also, let's say, US companies in the US? Personal certificates.
It's a very good observation. I mean, I experienced this firsthand. I've seen companies that I work with who are global players and have already established a good way of handling digital signatures within Europe. Now their US departments are asking the same questions. How can we actually get these way of validating the people who are going to be signing in an easy and quick way?
Yeah.
And since it's already established in their organization within Europe, and we do have a high level of security and it's accepted pretty much, more or less, to summarize it quickly, they say, let's go with that.
Yeah.
Let's try this out because it's good, it's approved somewhere, and it's absolutely better than most what we can get in our region. And this is not only for the US, we see it in South America, we see it
Yeah.
in other parts of the world where there isn't anything that's easy to do or easy to implement, I would say. They are actually looking into how can we implement qualified electronic signatures. So yes, that's a very good observation and something we definitely seen.
So, Peter, what are the top challenges for enterprise clients that want to embrace information security?
That would be legal and regulatory compliance,
Yeah.
security, and user experience.